Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We're very happy that you are here. Today is a day that we have a very good conversation planned for you and having two very interesting guests. Seth Chalmers, professional engineer and director of traffic engineering at Dibble Engineering in Arizona, and Dr. Alyssa Ryan from the University of Arizona. Thank you both for being here. You guys have had a lot of experience, a lot of hands-on work towards exactly what we're talking about today. You know, the problem of driver errors and the consequences. Meanwhile, I'm Monica Noguera, Director of Content Acquisition and Development here at SA International. I'm joined by my colleague, Sisi Martucci, who is monitoring our chat. She's from our marketing group. And again, as Matt said, we have two polls already live. Please make sure that you answer them because they're interesting questions. Alyssa, if you would like to start talking a little bit about you, or, you know, your background, or what you do, and give us a general idea of what you're seeing in the world right now, in the world of ADAS.
Fantastic. So hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Alyssa Ryan, as was mentioned, at the University of Arizona, where I'm an assistant professor. I've been there for a little over 2 years now, studying safety and human factors. I trained in Massachusetts at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, bachelor's through PhD on safety and human factors as well, studying a range of different things in that area, but mostly looking at how drivers are, reacting in different situations, especially with new technology. I studied their interactions with drones, for example, to see how drones may be distracting and how people may interact with them while people are driving along the roadway. So that's just a bit of my background and what I study day to day. How I view the world of human factors with ADAS, I find it really promising and exciting. I think it's and we'll dive into a bit more in the session on it, but it's challenging to strike a balance of ensuring that these systems support the driver and do not take away from the driving task so much that the drivers no longer pay attention to some of the things that they need to be in order to drive safely. So it's that balance of how do we make sure that attention is still fully on the driving task and these different situations that the ADAS may make easier while still allowing them to create the safest outcome, which I know has been changing a lot in behavior and attitudes since the pandemic as well in the United States. So I'm sure I'll dive a bit more into that in the coming questions, but that's
absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes. Seth, tell us more about you and the work you do.
Yeah, so I'm the practitioner, traffic engineer. So sometimes I regard myself as the contrarian because we do a lot of private development work. And I'm always trying to work with our clients to make them make their sites work better. But I'm a civil engineer, professional engineer here for Dibble. I went to the University of Arizona, so I'm alumni. Go Cats! and really, I think I'm a very capable traffic engineer because I'm very capable of stupid driving. And if you don't believe me, ask my wife. So anyway, but what I like about traffic engineering is the collision of human factors and engineering and together. And, engineering is based on rational, making decisions based on data, whereas the human condition, sometimes our emotions get the better of us. So really the way I look at ADAS is being able to overcome our human frailties, because you look at our whole transportation system, at least with vehicles and pedestrians and bicycles, it's really based on goodwill. It's me. I follow the rules of the road. I stop when I should. I go the right speed. We're totally dependent on that. And I think ADAS allows us to overcome our emotions and make us more rational drivers and hopefully more efficient and safer drivers.
Right. So starting with that, can we really define right now, so people are clear, what ADAS is in ADS?
Yeah, so it's assisted driver system. I don't know. Sometimes you get a little confused on it, but it's the systems that actually assist us. And I think it really started with the blind spot sensors that you have on your mirrors, and of course the backing camera. And now it's really getting very sophisticated with automatic emergency braking. Pedestrian emergency braking is coming on. We know that rule's pending. NHTSA is looking at a rule.
Yes.
But really my experience with ADAS started back in 2017 when I bought a new car, and then for my son, and we drove it across the country from here to Phoenix to Philadelphia. And I was just so impressed with the adaptive speed control. It actually made me a very patient driver because you could set the space between you. And of course, the system had a LiDAR system, so it was able to adjust the speed, and I didn't really have to do that. So it was just like, okay, I'm driving along I-40 and I'm just looking at the scenery, and it was amazing how much better it made that trip and how less fatigued I was when I stopped, when just driving. So, and I've had a personal experience with the automatic emergency braking. It probably prevented at least one crash for me. It would have been just a rear end crash, but the system engaged. It warns. I get a lot of false positives sometimes, but I'd rather be on the error of safety rather than it not activate, because you think the system has to really react within a couple seconds. It's amazing, the technology. And if you look at the pending rule that NHTSA has out on emergency braking, it's 349 pages long. So what I'm really amazed at with our auto manufacturers here in the U.S. and also in the world is these systems are incredibly difficult. In a lot of ways, I think it's harder to assist a human driver than it is to make a robot driver that does everything. So you're looking at the human condition and the system working together. So it's amazing what this technology has already achieved, and I'm really excited about the future of ADAS.
Thank you, Alyssa. Would you concur? What's your take on this? And then we'll go back to the D drivers that Seth always talks about and how they come together. But please, your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't really have too much to add, but I agree, they're really fantastic in helping drivers kind of balance the driving task, which is really complex. And I think there are some that are more maybe useful at really helping create safer environments for specific drivers, while maybe other specific drivers would have different features that would work better for them. So considering the flaws of the actual drivers in what they're struggling with could be important here. We did have also a comment that the term ADAS, that's Jeff Wishart, who's also in Arizona, was specifically depreciated by SAE in a specific documentation recently. So I know that we still often use the term ADAS to define these systems, but they're also defined in other ways now too, in terms of automation driving features. So just to be aware that when we talk about this type of conversation, there's a lot of it's always changing, and for good reason, because these technologies are changing so quickly.
Very good. And let's talk about this later then. So going back to why we need this. Well, first of all, we still have a big problem, right? People are still dying because of human errors in terms of driving when they're driving, because others make mistakes, we make mistakes. So Seth, according to your EDGE report that was published last year, you talked about the D driver. Can you give us an insight on what that is?
So this relates back to my Pima County. I was a Pima County traffic engineer for 6 years, and we used to meet with our sheriff's department every month to discuss crashes and enforcement issues and traffic operation issues. It was very enlightening, and it was a wonderful experience actually to get that relationship with our sheriff's department, because they were very concerned about safety. But sometimes law enforcement, they call it the 4D drivers. So that's drunk, drugged, dumb and distracted. So, a lot of times when you're in law enforcement, you're finding a reason why the crashes happen. And a lot of times we get to the point where we blame the driver based on those 4Ds. And I think that, that's not always the case, but I think that does describe a lot of what the behaviors that result in crashes and things happening that we don't want to happen. Of course, we have to admit that we can be 4D drivers too. So it's not just blaming someone else. We need to also look back at ourselves and say, hey, how many times have I been dumb or distracted, or maybe I've driven and I've been a little buzzed and I shouldn't have driven. So I think we have to admit that. But we've also, in our EDGE report, we added 2 others, I think, because those 4Ds don't quite cover everything, and that was disorders and dementia. And I added dementia because I actually have a dementia experience in my own family where my dad died of dementia. And also when I was with Pima County Department of Transportation, we actually had a dementia crash where a lady would go to church every day or every Sunday, drive from her home, go to church and go back. And dementia people are very good at fooling people that they're having symptoms or cognitive issues. And when she was driving back from church one Sunday, a lady crossed in front of her at a place that, there was no crossing, and she ran over the lady and killed her. And that was related in the after report with that crash. It was that she had dementia. So, she couldn't react to something that wasn't part of her routine. And unfortunately, someone died because of it. So
Because of that, yes. But on the other hand, you have worked for years in terms of research of also the major contributing causes of crashes, right? Besides what Seth has already talked about, what could you add? Anything that would come to mind that, it's getting worse?
Yeah, so I can definitely add a few things on that end. So we see this statistic thrown around a lot. That's about 94% of crashes, have something to do with human error and human factors. And that's not to say that, 94% of crashes are the driver's fault. Maybe they should just been paying attention more. No, I mean, that could be because they didn't understand a sign that an engineer put out, or maybe that's, they were distracted, so it is kind of their fault. But that isn't to say that one mistake should cost anyone their life or even injury. People make mistakes daily.
Just to relate to some of the chat that we have about driver assist systems making people more reckless, I still think there's a part of goodwill that has to be in driving. So I think, and I didn't mention this earlier, but in traffic engineering, we have what we call the 85th percentile, which means that 85% of the people will drive reasonably. And the other 15%, it's jump all. I mean, if people want to willfully be reckless, not wear their seatbelt, go too fast, run red lights, they're going to be able to overcome these systems. So again, I very much favor eventually robot drivers driving our cars, so we don't have any of that. There is no, that human nature issue is much reduced. But I mean, human driver is going to be around for a long time. I think there's 273 million registered drivers in the US alone, and worldwide it's humongous. So I think, we have to keep the numbers in order, and also look at incremental improvement is always good. You can't go from zero to safety in 5 years. It's going to take
5 years. No, that's very true. Very true. So we have the results of a survey that was done in June of 2023, TRIP, a National Transportation Research nonprofit, that published this report where they examined the causes of increasing U.S. traffic fatalities. Can you guys talk about that? Why are we still looking at increasing numbers instead of decreasing numbers of fatalities?
But I think to put the trip report, it's a great report, and there's a lot of other organizations that do the same thing, either every other year or annually. I think what, we have to look back, and I do this in the EDGE report, where we look back all the way to 1899 when automobiles started to come online, and then of course when Ford really made the Model A and the Model T, that's when we really started to get going. And in 1924, we had 24,000 people killed in auto crashes in the U.S. And that was probably millions of cars. Now we have, over 200 million registered cars in the United States. We're driving, 3.5 trillion vehicle miles traveled. So, the exposure is huge now. And sometimes we look at the fatal rate's going up. Actually, the fatal rate's kind of trending down if you look at exposure. And I think a lot of the improvements we got in safety is when seatbelts became mandatory, and after the 1966 Highway Safety Act, and then padded dashboards, the collapsible steering column. So I think when we look at that safety, we have to look at it in that historic perspective. Since 1899, 3.9 people have been killed, or 3.9 million people have been killed in auto accidents in the United States. And if you look at all the wars since 1899, it's about 600,000. In fact, when Lyndon Johnson signed the 1966 Highway Safety Act, he made the same remark that more people have died on the highways in the United States than our wars at that time. So, I think what I have a problem with the trip thing is it's the same thing every year. On average, 42,000 people die in the United States in auto crashes. That happened last year, the year before. We peaked at around 52,000 in 1972, and it's been going kind of trending down since then. But it's really, how we're going to reduce that in half, and I think, a lot of the improvements we've made, and ADAS really is, I think, our next major effort that overcomes like cell phones. Cell phones kind of, I think, set us back because it makes more distraction possible. And that's, cell phones have really been around since the mid 2000s. So I think we lost some reductions there, and we have to overcome that by reducing that distraction issue.
I also just want to add, I agree with everything Seth said. And in addition, research has shown that after the pandemic and during the pandemic, the level of risk that people are willing to accept to some extent has increased, right? Because we went through this really tumultuous time. It's very, very stressful. Your health was at risk. And therefore, the kind of level of stress and the level of risk you're willing to put yourself in has increased. And so we see drivers kind of going a bit more reckless than we did before the pandemic, potentially because of that reasoning. I guess we still don't quite know why. But we also are seeing a lot of, higher speeds in the United States, and speed is directly correlated with fatal crashes. If you're going 30 miles an hour and you hit a tree, you have a higher likelihood of surviving than if you're going 70 miles per hour or even 40 miles per hour. So understanding the differences in the speeds people are going across the US, which is higher than was 10 years ago, is going to make a big difference as well.
Right.
I'd like to add to that, my distinguished colleagues from Iowa State, they do an annual review of all the fatal crashes for the Iowa DOT. And believe it or not, I think the last report, they said 45% of the fatals involve people not wearing their seatbelt. I mean, that is huge.
Basic, no? So basic.
Think about, it's so basic to wear your seatbelt, and how do you help people that are not going to wear their seatbelt? I don't know. Don't let the car go.
You stop the car. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, in 1979, I think we had a law for 1 year that had the ignition interlock device, so you couldn't start your car unless your seatbelt was fastened. But I think there was such a public uproar on that, an infringement on everything, that it was repealed by Congress. So but I think people say, hey, if you want to reduce the fatal rate in the United States by 25%, what is that? 10,000 people. All they need to do is get people to wear their seatbelt.
Oh my God!
So they're ready for that crash.
Yes, unbelievable. We have some questions coming in from the audience. considering the higher costs of better sensors, sensors and computers to make ADAS more reliable. How will OEMs justify these expenditures when many end users are either annoyed by or abuse ADAS systems? So who would like to address that?
I'll take a stab at it first. First of all, it's called the mystery book. What is this called? The owner's manual. I've had a car since 2019, and I only read the owner's manual when I have to. No, there's an expense on this, and I think there was a poll here about affordable transportation, and the expense of these systems and the fact that they do. I mean, if you have your major computer system go out, you might be looking at a $5,000 repair bill on some of these systems. So, I don't really have an answer to that, but I do have concerns on that. But on the other hand, if you can afford to buy this safety, I think it's well worth it. And what's good now, the market, there's used cars out there with some of these systems in them that are much more affordable. And I think really the market penetration happened in 2016 and 17 when you saw Toyota and Honda and some of the other manufacturers come out with these systems that were in the price range that is affordable, but not for everybody, but a lot of people. And plus, then you get that depreciation once you get that on the used car market.
So, but then for both of you, do you envision any mandatory testing of the ADAS system as part of servicing these vehicles when they are on the road for 10 years or more? Do you expect the government to mandate the recalibration, which is something that we published about too, of systems periodically to ultimately achieve zero fatal accidents?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Yeah, I can start with this
go ahead.
So I think it's going to be state dependent potentially at first. For example, in Massachusetts, in New York State rather, where I grew up, it was required that you had your vehicle tested, I believe, every year by some sort of mechanic just to make sure everything was working properly in order for you to legally drive on the road. In Arizona, I haven't faced that. We have emissions testing in Tucson, which is great, but we have nothing in terms of like you could be driving a car that could break in like 2 seconds and it's not illegal. Which does concern me a bit when I'm driving sometimes and see some vehicles that look kind of sketchy. But anyway, my point being that I think it could be very state dependent to start, but I do see eventually it mandated to some extent. For example, automatic emergency braking is going to be required in new vehicles starting in September 2029 from a new federal mandate that went out very recently. So if we're starting to see these things be required in vehicles, I could certainly see testing for these vehicles, those types of testing be required in these vehicles to make sure they're working properly. In the same way, you'd want to make sure that the rest of your system is working just as properly.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
yes, go ahead, Seth,
add
please.
to it, and this is a plug for Alyssa's work at the University of Arizona CAT Center. Is I think the simulator, the idea of making these or training on these systems as a simulator is what needs to be done in the showroom, and then a follow up with the showroom. And I would look at that as a potential selling tool for the vehicle manufacturers to say, hey, come into our showroom and get in the simulator, and we'll show you all the safety our car has in a controlled environment. You don't want to do a test drive and say, hey, let's try out the automatic emergency braking here and see if it works. So I think that's an idea that the manufacturers should do. And then you could have that in the showroom. People could look at it and say, oh, this model has this, that model has that. And then also once you sell the car, then you could use that same simulator to train the customer on how these things work and don't work.
Yeah.
So, automatic emergency braking doesn't necessarily see around the corner. At least the current versions don't. So, I think that's a real issue that people need to realize what the limitations are on these systems and the fact they're still in charge of the car, but they're there to help them. And here's what it does. So I think that there's a real opportunity there for us to help, sell these types of cars and better train people on how to use these cars.
Yes. No, agreed. Because, yeah, on my next car, I will need training. I will need
Or
training.
you have to read the mystery book
I have to read the manual. Yes, yes.
or do a
Another
YouTube.
question that came up: how do you think the virtual technologies, real time software, and simulators can help in ADA's development by simulating human error scenarios on the loop? Alyssa,
So Seth,
anything?
yeah, Seth was just talking about this, so I'm happy to hop in. So driving simulators have been used for decades to study human factors and human behavior in really successful ways. And the reason they're so useful is that you can really control for everything in a given environment. So you can control the weather, you can control when the signal is going to change to it from red to green or whatever it may be. So having that type of environment allows us to really understand how would a driver react in that situation. And it's been proven time and time again that it is reflective of how someone would quote unquote drive in the quote real world outside of that simulated environment. I think it's really important that we continue to use that work, especially as putting someone in a vehicle and having them drive with these different features and recording them and putting eye tracking glasses on them and putting sensors on them to understand the driving and asking them to drive in a specific route is technically like it's very unsafe from a human factors IRB perspective, which is institutional review board. So at a university, if we study humans, we have to get it approved to make sure that we're not putting people at risk. And if we ask them to drive a specific route, we say it's because driving is really unsafe, it won't get approved. I'm really hoping for another study that collects a lot of driver behavior information, such as Sharp2. If anyone is familiar, it's a large data set that recorded a lot of drivers over hundreds of hours of driving, and included crashes that happen just in people's daily lives and their different behaviors. If we have something like that, in addition to driving simulation, with these different features, I think those data sets can be really powerful at helping us understand these human errors and why they're happening and how we can refine these processes. I'm also quite positive that these private companies who are creating these ADAS systems, have their own types of software and simulation. So if there's any way for public to know more about what's happening and for us to get involved and learn from each other, I think that would be really useful. But I also understand that's proprietary and probably going to be difficult to do.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah. Okay. So we have another audience question. We need to bring up vehicle service in this conversation. Many of these advanced systems are dependent upon a well-maintained vehicle, tires, brakes, electrical systems, suspension, etc. If these systems are not maintained and kept at their designed functionality, then ADAS will not perform as designed or intended. This is a huge oversight in our vehicle equation. What do you guys think?
Well, being a civil engineer and one that, a lot of times people are always, oh yeah, the CIP, build the new project and then build it and forget about it. There's always an issue of maintenance and operations that you have to set aside resources to maintain and operate what you have. And, I think in America, we're really good at building things, but sometimes, oh yeah, what about that bridge? We need to maybe paint it. Our roads have potholes in it.
Yes.
So, I think, that's a personal responsibility and accountability for each person to maintain their car in a reasonable fashion. I have another Pima County story that unfortunately involves a fatal crash, but I think helps illustrate the issue. There was a guy driving on Bop Road, which is south of Tucson. It's a very up and down road, lots of drainages, and he had a seatbelt buckled behind him, so he didn't have to worry about the device warning him that he didn't have a seatbelt on. And then he had bad shocks, and then he was driving too fast. So then he hit a dip, got ejected out the passenger side door or the window, which was closed. So he went through the window and went onto the road. That didn't kill him. The car behind him that ran over him killed him. So the response that we did when I was at Pima County is that, well, we need a dip warning sign program, to warn people of dips. And it's like, this guy, his suspension system didn't work right. He didn't wear a seatbelt and he was going too fast. So again, it
Or
goes back.
asking for it, right?
Yeah. So, you had to go back to that responsibility. And I'm not trying to put down that comment. I'm just saying to try to put that in perspective that, we're all responsible for our own actions and doing what we need to do.
Absolutely. Alyssa.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Like we have to create this safety culture that, everyone is a part of this. If they're on the roadway in any way, pedestrian, cyclist, driver, you have to make sure you're maintaining your system. I think some issues that may arise with this is that, hey, I don't know how many mechanics and auto shops are well versed in fixing ADAS systems. Like, do you have to go to the specific manufacturer of your vehicle to fix it? You can't just go to your favorite guy who changes your tire down the road anymore to fix these issues. So I don't quite know what the workforce issue would be there, but I'd imagine there would be. And how do we overcome that? I don't know. Another issue is with these new systems, and maybe it's more expensive to repair them. So maybe there has to be some sort of government involvement here to make sure, they do get maintained in this way, because not all drivers are going to do that. And we have to accept that they're going to make a mistake of saying, oh, I'll push that off to like 3 weeks from now. I don't have time to do that right now, or I don't have the money to do that right now. This stuff can get really expensive for drivers. So how do we make sure the system is equitable in a way that, is not leaving out those people who can't afford that maintenance that they weren't expecting when they bought the vehicle, because it was more expensive, because they were never told that information, because they didn't read the manual, or whatever it may be. No one's going to do that. They don't know someone who owns it yet, so they didn't know that would happen based on their conversations with their friends and family. So I think, yeah, we're going to need some sort of regulation here and some sort of mechanism to make sure people have that ability and they're told they have to. Otherwise, I'm not confident people will, and we'll unfortunately end up with more situations that Seth's story was in, where something wasn't maintained properly, and maybe he just thought he could push it off because he didn't think it was a big deal, and then it results in a serious consequence.
Right. No, totally. Now we have a new question that just came in. Does the investigation of aberrant driving behaviors between CMV and LMV drivers contribute to the development of ADAS?
Well, I think you brings up the opportunity for us to talk about DADs, and also the other one that's a real long drive, which is driver monitor of inattention and impairment using vehicle equipment. So that's that proposed rule that NHTSA is an advanced rulemaking on that one, and then DADS is the driver alcohol detection systems for safety, which is a touch-specific sensor or an easy-to-use breathalyzer to look at blood alcohol content. So that, to me, that's, we haven't talked about impaired driving or drunk driving very much, but that's I think, what two systems that ADAS systems that I'm really excited about, because that's a behavior that is really difficult to deal with. We talk about, you don't drive drunk, or you'll get enforcement or pulled over, or get a drunk driving or DUI conviction and all that. But if you look at, I think the CDC has a self-reporting drunk driving self-reporting thing that's like 131 million per year or 100 million a year. I don't know why people self-report on that, but that's a lot of drunk driving episodes. And then if you look at the FBI database about enforcement, about 600,000 people get arrested for DUI every year. So, that enforcement or threat of enforcement really is not addressing the issue. So we really have to address the issue at the vehicle itself. And I think DADS is a great program. It's been around for a long time. There's a lot of technology issues. There's a lot of policy issues. There's a lot of political issues. So hopefully that will move forward to address that issue.
Okay, so we have some poll results. First question, which ADAS system do you find most helpful? The top result, automatic braking. It's a good one. Second, if you could correct one negative driver behavior or error, what would it be? Top result, tailgating. What do you think of that?
I agree.
Alyssa.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're all problematic and good in some ways, for the systems and the negative behaviors. But it's not too surprising. I think tailgating is one that like people also feel personally offended and annoyed by, even if it isn't like
Yes.
the quote unquote most unsafe behavior, but it's annoying.
Well, and tailgating results in the nuisance crash called the rear end crash, which, is not typically doesn't hurt people if it's not at a high speed. But, each of you just now, spent $5,000 and have to get your car
Right.
fixed. And
Yes.
then you're in the middle of
Yes.
traffic and it's just a, pain in the what.
Like something you did not need and it was totally avoidable.
Yeah.
We are now 3 minutes. So I'm going to ask you for final thoughts. Alyssa, please.
Oh, so I mean, I think that these systems have a great potential to increase safety and make the driving task easier while still more engaged with drivers, which is kind of this balance we need to be striking right now, of keeping them involved in the driving task while also making difficult tasks easier, for them to notice things they weren't before. And then we also have to be keeping up with these policies and regulations that are coming out, and also help inform them to make sure that these systems are going in safely, and need to be working with our industry partners, who are developing these systems more than ever, I'd say. It can be difficult, but if you can find partnerships with them to work with your government, and create these different conversations, I think it'll only result in a positive outcome. But this has been a great experience. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Seth.
I really think as an industry, we need to adopt the safe systems approach that's being promoted by FHWA and NHTSA and USDOT. I mean, it's a wonderful strategy because it spreads the responsibility around to, the infrastructure owner and operators plus the drivers. I still think we need a piece of pie in there called political leaders and legislators. But
And political will too.
Yeah.
No?
But what's great is the bill grant. The bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill is one that's brought out these NHTSA things about automatic emergency braking, the DADs and drive. That's coming from that legislation. So we're starting to see the legislation take hold on these systems so that we can really, keep that curve going, trending down on the amount of deaths that we have on our highways. So I'm really excited. This is a great time to be in this industry, and I've been around for 41 years, so I'm somewhat historic. And I was around when the 1966 Highway Safety Act got signed, even though I was 6 years old at the time. But I'm really excited about that, and I really think the safe system approach we need to adopt, and the manufacturers need to adopt it and say, hey, put that in front of your customers and say, hey, this car is part of this.
Right. No, totally agree. And thank you both so very much. Thank you to all of you who have joined us and made this whole thing possible. Until next time, until the next mobility frontier.